So, good morning class. Today we will discuss about packing in solids. We will discuss about different packing fractions, how the packing takes place and the different modes of packing. So, basically in the last sessions we discussed about different types of unit cells. We discussed about primitive and saw the 7 types of Bravais lattices. So, in the same session we will calculate the number of atoms in different types of packings. So, let us discuss about types of unit cells. Types of unit cells. So, we already know that unit cells are of 4 types, that is simple unit cell or primitive unit cell. Next is body centered, face centered and end centered or edge centered. So, basically let us discuss the first one, that is primitive or simple unit cell. Primitive or simple unit cell. Primitive or simple unit cell. So, a unit cell in which the constituent particles are present only on the 8 corners. So, the particles are present only on the 8 corners and nowhere else. So, let us see what is a simple unit cell. So, let this be our unit cell. So, let this be our unit cell and the constituent particles are present only on the 8 corners. And the constituent particles are present on the 8 corners and these are the constituent particles. These are the constituent particles which can be atoms, molecules or ions. They can be any, and this is an example of primitive or simple unit cell. Now, we are moving forward to our next topic, that is face centered unit cell. That is face centered unit cell. Face centered unit cell, that is FCC, in short called FCC arrangement. So, in case of face centered unit cell, the constituent particles are present at the 8 corners plus and also on the centers of 6 faces and also on the center of 6 faces. So, let us see the case of FCC arrangement or face centered cubic arrangement. Face centered cubic arrangement. So, the particles are present on the 8 corners. So, they are present on the 8 corners and also on the center of 6 faces. So, this would be the center of first face, second face, third face, fourth face, fifth face and the 6th face would be at the back. So, these are the constituent particles at the corners and these are at the phase centers. Constituent particles at phase centers. They are at phase centers. So, this is a case of phase centered unit cell. So, this we have 4 types of unit cell: simple or primitive unit cell, phase centered body unit cell, body centered unit cell, and the last one is edge centered or end centered unit cell. So, we are discussing the 4 types of unit cells. So, we have already discussed the 7 Bravais lattices or the 7 types of primitive unit cell, and those are cubic, tetragonal, orthorhombic, rhombohedral, triclinic, orthogonal, and the last one is monoclinic. So, we have already discussed these 7 types of primitive unit cell, also called 7 crystal systems or 7 Bravais lattices. So, we have discussed the first type of unit cell, that is primitive or simple unit cell. So, in this unit cells, constituent particles are present only at the 8 corners and nowhere else it is found. So, this is our unit cell, and these are the constituent particles which are present at the corners, on the 8 corners, and these constituent particles can be either atoms or molecules, or they can be ions, depending upon the type of crystal or the type of solid. The next type of unit cell is phase centered unit cell, also called FCC arrangement. So, in this type of unit cell, the constituent particles are present at the 8 corners and also on the centers of 6 faces of that unit cell. So, this is our unit cell, and the particles are present on the 8 corners and also on the center of 6 faces. So, these are the particles on the corners, they are settled on the corners of the unit cell, and these are the particles which are found at the center of the 6 faces of the unit cell. So, these are the first 2 category of unit cells. Now, let us move on to the third type, that is body centered unit cell, that is also called BCC unit cell. Now, let us move on to the third type of unit cell, that is body centered unit cell. Body centered unit cell. So, first of all, what is the meaning of body centered unit cell? So, in case of body centered unit cell, the constituent particles are present at the 8 corners. They are present at the 8 corners plus 1 on the, and 1 particle is present on body center. So, 8 particles on the 8 corners and 1 particle at the body center. So, if we draw the structure of body centered unit cell, so if this is our unit cell, if this is our unit cell, if this is our unit cell, and in case of body centered unit cell, the particles are present on the 8 corners. So, these are the particles which are present on 8 corners of the unit cell, and also 1 particle would be present at the body center, which would lie somewhere in the middle of the body of the entire unit cell. So, these are the constituent particles, at 8 corners of the unit cell, and this is the constituent particle at the body center. So, this is the constituent particle which is present at body center. And the last one is fourth type of unit cell, that is called end centered or edge centered, end centered or edge centered unit cell, end centered or edge centered unit cell. So, in case of end centered or edge centered unit cell, the constituent particles are present at the 8 corners and also on a pair of opposite faces, and that too on the center of the face. It can be any pair. The pair can be either left or right, it can be top or bottom, or it can be front or backward side. Any one pair can be there. So, if we look at the structure of end centered or edge centered unit cell, so if this is our unit cell, so if this is our unit cell, and let the particles, the arrangement of particles would be 8 particles on the 8 corners, 8 particles on the 8 corners, so these are the particles constituent particles at 8 corners, and one would be on the pair of opposite faces. So, let one would be here and one would be in the middle of this face. So, this is the particle at the center of pair of opposite face, So, the face can be either top or bottom, left or right, or front side or backward side. It can be any one set, any one pair. So, these are the different types of unit cells. So, the first one was primitive or simple unit cell, second was face centered unit cell, also called FCC arrangement, third was body centered unit cell, also called BCC arrangement, and the fourth is end centered or edge centered unit cell. So, we have already discussed the first two types of unit cell. So, the third type of unit cell is body centered unit cell. So, in case of body centered unit cell, the constituent particles are present at 8 corners and one particle is present on the body center. So, if this is our body center unit cell, so these are the particles which are present at the 8 corners, and this one is the particle which is present at body center. So, this is the particle which is present at body center. Now, the fourth type is end centered or edge centered unit cell. So, in this case the constituent particles are present at the 8 corners and also a pair is present, a pair of particle is present or the particles are present on a pair of opposite faces. So, the pair of opposite faces can be either left or right, or they can be front or backward side, or either can be top or bottom side. So, if this is our end centered or edge centered unit cell, and these are the particles which are present on the 8 corners of that unit cell. So, and these two are the particles which are present on the pair of opposite faces, which can be, I have taken here on the front and backward side. They can be either front or back, they can be either left or right, or they can be top or bottom. So, in case of end centered or edge centered unit cell, they are present on the 8 corners and also on a pair of opposite faces. So, these are the 4 types of unit cells. Okay. Now, next we have to see some of the laws for the calculation of particles in unit cell. So, we have to calculate the number of particles which are present in a given unit cell. So, we have to calculate the number of particles which are present in a given unit cell. So, calculation of particles in unit cell. So, there are 4 laws, or rather we should not say it a law, it is just a statement which are very much important for the calculation of particles for a given unit cell. It can be different arrangements. So, there are 4 theories or 4 statements. The first one is, if the particle is present at the corner, if it is present at the corner, what happens? It is shared by 8 other particles, and hence the contribution of each particle is 1 by 8. Second point says, if the particle is present at the face center, then it is shared by 2 other particles, and the contribution of each particle in this case is 1 by 2. Third point, if the particle is present at the body center, comma, then it is not shared by any other particle, means it belongs to the same unit cell, and hence its contribution is 1, complete 1. Contribution of each particle is 1. And fourth point is, if particle is present at the edge center or end center, it can be said any one of the 2, then it is shared by 4 particles, and hence the contribution of each particle is 1 by 4. So, these are some of the laws or some of the rules which is used for the calculation of number of particles in a given type of unit cell. So, there are 4 rules for the calculation of particles. The first rule is, if the particle is present at the corner of unit cell, then it is shared by 8 other particles of the same or different unit cells, and hence the contribution of each particle is 1 by 8. Next, if the particle is present at the phase center of the unit cell, then it is shared by 2 other particles and hence the contribution of each particle is 1 by 2. If the particle is present at the body center, then it is not shared by any other particle, means it belongs to only to that particular unit cell, and hence its contribution is 1, complete 1. And fourth one, if the particle is present at the edge center or the end centered, then it is shared by 4 other particles of the same unit cell or different unit cell, and hence each particle which is present at the edge center or end centered has a contribution of 1 by 4. Now, let us move forward. Now, we shall calculate the number of particles in unit cell. Okay. Now, calculation of number of particles in unit cell. So, now we will calculate the number of particles which are present in unit cell. So, in this case, let us take the first one, that is simple unit cell. Simple unit cell. So, if we draw the diagram of simple unit cell, or let us a schematic diagram of simple unit cell. So, in case of simple unit cell, the particles are present only on the 8 corners. So, it is present only on the 8 corners. So, these are the constituent particles of simple unit cell which are present only on the 8 corners. So, number of particles would be we have 8 particles on the 8 corners, and the contribution of each particle which is found at the corner is 1 by 8. So, it would be cancelled. There would be 1 particle in a simple cubic system or simple unit cell. Next, let us discuss about second type of unit cell, that is face centered unit cell. Face centered unit cell. So, let us, if we draw the diagram of face centered unit cell, so let this be a face centered unit cell, wherein these are the particles which are present on the 8 corners. So, these are the particles which are present on the 8 corners, and also 6 particles are present at the center of 6 faces. So, this is a face centered unit cell, center of 6 faces. So, in case of face centered unit cell, we have 8 particles at corners and 6 particles at face centers, but the total number of particles are, in case of face centered, is, so the number of particles would be is equal to, first of all let us discuss for 8 particles which are present at corners, and then we will discuss about face centers. So, 8 particles at the corners, and each have a contribution of 1 by 8 plus 6 particles are present at the phase centers and each has a contribution of 1 by 2. So, this was cancel out, it become 3 and 8, 1. So, it would be 1 plus 3 is equal to 4 particles. It would be 4 particles. So, in case of simple unit cell, we have 8 particles at the 8 corners. So, in case when we are calculating the number of particles, so we have 8 particles at the 8 corners and each have a contribution of 1 by 8. So, this will cancel out, it will become 1. So, in case of a simple unit cell, we have only one particle, that can be one atom, one molecule, or it can be one ion. And in case of phase centered unit cell, we have 8 particles at the corners and 6 particles at the phase centers. So, when we will calculate the number of particles, so we have 8 particles at 8 corners having a contribution of 1 by 8 and 6 particles at the phase centers having a contribution of 1 by 2. So, this was cancel out, it will become 1 and this will cancel out, it will become 3. So, 3 plus 1 becomes 4. That means, in a case of phase centered unit cell, we have net amount of 4 particles in a phase centered unit cell. Now, let us move on to our next third type of unit cell, that is body centered unit cell. Body centered unit cell. So, in case of body centered unit cell, we have 8 particles at the 8 corners we have 8 particles at the 8 corners and we have one particle which is settled on the phase center, body center. So, this is the particle which is present on body center. So, in case of body centered unit cell, we have 8 particles at corners and 1 particle at body center. So, while calculating the number of atoms or number of particles in a case of body centered unit cell, we have 8 particles having a contribution of 1 by 8 and 1 particle which has contribution of 1. So, this was cancel out, it will have 1 plus 1 is equal to 2 particles. So, this was the third case of body centered unit cell, wherein the 8 particles are present at 8 corners and 1 particle is present at body center. So, 8 particles at the corners and 1 particle at body center. So, when we will calculate the number of particles, so here would be 8 particles which are present at body at the corners having a contribution of 1 by 8 and 1 at the body center. So, this would cancel out, it will become 1 plus 1 is equal to 2 particles. For in the case of body centered unit cell, we have a net amount of 2 particles in the given unit cell. Thank you, class.